Hello and welcome. This is Lockdown TV from unheard.com. Today we are joined by not one but two epidemiologists and experts to find out what the state of play is in the coronavirus pandemic. First of all, we have Professor Carl Hennigan, who is the director of the Oxford University-based Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. And also on the line down from Rome in Italy, we have Tom Jefferson, who is also an epidemiologist, part of the Cochrane Centre, which is a charity that works on improving the evidence base for medical interventions. So thank you both very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
I understand that you actually are talking almost once or even more than once a day during this pandemic. So you've worked as a team already.
Yeah, well, Tom and I have been working together for about 12 years ago, and we can go right back to 2009 to the swine flu pandemic. And subsequently, throughout this pandemic, we've been really interested in the evidence. We've been interested in the transmission dynamics, what's happening on the ground. And Tom and I speak daily about the issues, trying to understand a lot of the uncertainties out there.
So let me start, Carl, with you then, with a kind of bit of a broader question, which is that you're director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. I mean, this is what we want. We want to make decisions on the basis of evidence. How do you feel the medical response and the government policy response has been in terms of evidence-based medicine? Has this pandemic been a good period for evidence-based medicine?
I think what we'll find as we go through this, that this has been a period where there have been lots of issues with the production of evidence and its interpretation. What people have found very difficult is to deal with uncertainty. And often what really riles me and makes me concerned is when I hear people in the media or talking and saying, without question, this is what's going to happen next. So I think there's been a significant problem with predictions. None of them so far have been shown to be right. The second area where we try and do a lot of work is in evidence synthesis. That's where Tom is part of it, and we both work with Cochrane. But we try and review the evidence to try and understand its quality, what it means in terms of informing policy. And while the evidence has been produced in a way that we've never seen before for coronaviruses, what a lot of it is poor quality, and it doesn't help us actually inform the policies. And a good area for that would be an area like masks. One of the issues we've come to say is, if you look at the evidence, and Tom can come in because he's done the reviews in this area for about 15 years now, is to say, really to inform policy, what you need to do is have an approach to develop high quality evidence, to do randomized controlled trials. And while we seemingly understand that for drugs, given the recent evidence from dexamethasone versus hydroxychloroquine, we get it there. But when it comes to non-drug interventions, things like masks, we want to throw all of the ideas of high quality evidence out the window and then use poor quality information to inform what we should do next. And that's been a persistent problem over the last 10 or 12 years, that we failed to address the deficiencies in the evidence for areas like masks and what we do in the wider community.
Okay, so you brought us straight into masks there. So let me go to Tom then. You've been studying these non-medical or these physical interventions for years. What is your view of the wisdom of requiring mask use among the wider community?
Specifically on masks, there is no evidence that masks, aside from people who are exposed in front line, so healthcare workers, that masks actually make any difference. But that is extraordinary in its own. But what is even more extraordinary is that what I'm describing is uncertainty. We don't know whether these things make any difference. We don't know whether they make any difference by the type of agent that we're looking at. We don't know whether the materials or anything like that, the way they're fastened, the length of use, and so on, make any difference. These are non-healthcare worker settings, okay? So what does science usually do when there is uncertainty? Well, science deals with uncertainty by doing experiments like Carl described, randomized controlled trials. Now, the time for the randomized controlled trials was in February, in March, in April. No longer now, because the viral circulation is low, and we would need huge numbers of enrollees to show to know for certain whether there was any difference with mask wearing.
On masks, though, I have seen studies that have been widely shared on social media that investigate on the kind of physical level how much a mask can reduce the spread of particles, and there is evidence that masks work in that setting, isn't there? Even though there may not be evidence of the kind of sort of controlled sample style.
Freddie, we're dealing with some of the most slippery customers in the market, respiratory viruses. It's not just a question of the bug and the person, it's also the setting, which is why all these laboratory-based experiments with plumes, for instance, there are studies looking at the plume of droplets coming out of mask A versus mask B and so on, have to be treated with extreme care. What we really should be doing is our experiments, trials in the population. And we have to do them when there's virus circulating.
But isn't it a matter of common sense at all? I mean, do you believe that wearing a face covering reduces the amount that a respiratory virus can be transmitted, even though you may not have a population-wide study to prove it?
The problem with that particular belief is that the one arm of a randomized controlled trial, which was published in 2015, so one section of the people who took part in the study in Southeast Asia wore cloth masks. Okay, and they found that these cloth masks not only didn't work, but actually probably saliva and secretions and the wetness made them more permeable to incoming agents. So what I'm describing really is complete uncertainty. From
24th of July in the UK, it's going to be mandatory to wear masks in shops. It sounds, would I be right in saying that you don't think that sounds like a necessary or wise step? Or?
Well, look, the job of evidence-based medicine is to inform decision, not to be the decision. And this is an incredibly important point that I think a lot of people don't get when you're actually in healthcare and actually they're making decisions. So both Tom has been a general practitioner and at the weekends, I still work as an urgent care GP. I use the evidence to inform you about the benefits and the harms. So the question is, if you were in policy and asked us about what are the benefits and harms, we would tell you now that there is significant uncertainty. Any evidence that you bring to the table will be mechanistic, will be weak observational evidence, which has been shown over decades to have flaws. So by all means, people can wear masks or not wear masks. Policy can make the decision, but what they can't do is say it's an evidence-based decision. And I think that's really important. And there is a real separation, it seems, in my mind, the difference between an evidence-based decision and something which is becoming very opaque to me is science. Is we being led by the science. The science is the mechanism, the plumes, but it isn't the evidence. So by all means, wear or don't wear your mask, but the current evidence cannot reduce your uncertainty when it comes to the policy.